Folks, in this video, we are going to take a look at how to build a interface using the scene builder in IntelliJ. In the previous videos, we have shown you how to write the code directly, where you would, in Java, say, I want a text box, my text box equals new text box, text field, and then you would specify where you want it in the grid by adding it to the grid and so on and so forth. There is another way of doing this, which is called the scene builder. This is an example of a view controller layout where you have a separate view that you specify how things are going to look, and then a separate controller which specifies how things will interact with each other. So without further ado, I'm here in IntelliJ. I'm going to say new project. I'm going to still select JavaFX and make sure that I'm using the appropriate JDK for JavaFX, and I'm going to call it basic numbers. And I'm going to say yes. I would like to overwrite that. Okay, so when IntelliJ opens, you know that you end up with these couple of files up at the top. And previously I told you that if you're going to write everything yourself, you would come in here and you would comment this line out. But if you're going to use the site builder, you're not going to comment this line out. This line is going to be here to load in the sample fxml. So what is an fxml file? Well, as its name suggests, it's XML, which is a standard way of laying out a bunch of information in tags that look similar to HTML, but the tags are not HTML tags, they're XML tags, which means you can have different kinds of tags. So you can see here that this is defining a grid pane, and it's giving it a controller, and it's specifying a couple of other things like the horizontal gap and the vertical gap and the alignment and a XMLNS for this particular field. And you could come in here and directly edit this XML instead of writing the individual text fields and the individual labels and stuff in code. So in the previous example, you wrote all of that over here directly. You said text field, my text field gets new text field, label, my label gets new label, and you included all of the appropriate things in as imports. And then you manipulated them by putting them into the frame and adding them to a scene and adding the scene or setting the stage to that scene and so on and so forth. The other alternative, as I say, is that we can use this whizzy-bang little builder to drag and drop things over there. So the builder is just building the layout of how things are going to look, and it's up to us then to decide what we want to actually have happen. All right, so I've clicked on sample fxml, and down at the bottom here, there are two choices. The default is you'll see the text, which is the XML, but there's also a button for scene builder. If yours doesn't look like this, it's most likely that you have a bar across the top that says you're missing a plugin, and so you might need to press install to get that plugin, and then you'll have to jump through whatever hoops until you get to something that looks like this. All right, so what's happening in here? This is basically just an editor that allows us to build a GUI. So we can drag and drop buttons in, and then it generates the XML for us, and then we can interact with that XML to actually build the code around it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build just the outline of what a regular calculator would look like. So I'm not going to build every function, and I'm obviously not going to code all of it, but I'm going to give you the 10 buttons with the numbers on it and some kind of field up here that shows you the numbers that have been pressed down at the bottom. So we're going to start off with a grid pane because this is clearly a grid pane. And what we're going to do is we're going to drag some of the controls that I need into that grid pane. So in controls, you can see there's buttons, you can see that there are labels, you can see that there are text fields. Excuse me, down here, a text field is a single line, whereas a text area is multi-line. And then there's lots of other options in here as well for scrollers and radio buttons and all the other different types of controls that you might need. Up under containers, you have the layouts. So we have the grid pane, which is the default. You start off with the grid pane, and you don't want to delete that one because that causes some level of crazy. But you could also choose to have things in a vertical line or a horizontal line, and you could have things in a vertical box, text box, so on and so forth. So you can decide what layout you want. I'm going to stick with the grid pane here, and I'm going to just start dragging in some buttons. So I will tell you that, first off, this is a little bit finicky. Whether you're on a Mac or Windows machine or anything else, you're going to find that there are times where you try to click on something and it just doesn't click on it. As a matter of fact, this is the second time I'm recording this video because the first time I recorded it, I suddenly got to the point where I couldn't move a button. And so that just sometimes happens, and I don't know what to tell you. Just keep clicking on things. You'll eventually get there. So you may see me wrestle with that. All right, so I'm going to grab a button, and I'm just going to drag it down here into the grid pane. You notice that the grid pane wasn't really visible because it was 0 by 0 until I dragged something into it, and then it suddenly became 1 by 1 because that's what I dragged in there. The button is in row 0, column 0. That's what it's saying there, which all makes sense. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make this grid a little bit bigger because I need 9 by 9. So I'm going to click on the grid No, I'm not. I'm going to click on, yeah, I am. I'm going to click on the grid, and we are going to attempt to click on, where did they go? Come on now. Yeah, you see? See, things just get weird sometimes. All right, we're going to drag another button down here and see if that magically fixes everything for me. There we go. All right, before this disappears, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say that I want to add a column, which also chooses to not work today. This worked literally 10 seconds ago. Why is this not working? I am clicked on the grid pane, and that is not working. Okay, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to delete those two buttons, and then we are going to, okay, absolutely nothing is clickable all of a sudden. I can no longer right click or left click because my machine hates me. All right, let me pause and get this sorted. Okay, so we're back, and I really, somehow I had restarted the same program and I got into a screwy state by trying to overwrite a project. So don't overwrite a project, apparently, is an important rule. Who knew? Okay, so what I did was I just wiped it and started from scratch. So I'm back in a blank scene builder window here. And as I mentioned, I was going to grab a button and I was going to drag it down into the grid pane. So when I do that, I have one row and one column. If I right click on the grid pane and go to grid pane, I can say add row below. So I'm going to do that, and that gives me a second row, and I'm going to add another row below that again, which gives me a third row. I'm going to drag a couple more buttons in there. And when I click on a button and I come over here onto the right-hand side, there's a layout, there's properties, layout, and code. There's going to be three different panels up here at the top. If I go into layout, there's a row and a column number where I can specify exactly where I want something. So I've clicked on this second button, which as you can see is right now in 0, 0, and I'm going to move it to row 1. I'm going to click on this guy and I'm going to move him to row 2. And so now you can see I have 3 buttons. If I build this project and I run it, you'll see that I will get a pop-up window with those 3 buttons laid out as they are in the little GUI there. So here are my 3 buttons. Yay. Okay. All right. So we're going to continue building. I'm going to add another column to the right, and I'm going to add another column to the right after that. And I'm going to add in a bunch more buttons, 6 more. And you can see basically all I'm doing here is I'm just putting them in the appropriate place. So these are all going to be in column 1. Oops, I didn't click on that one. Column 1, and that's going to be 1. And this is going to be column 1 and row 2. This is going to be column 2 and row 0, column 2 and row 1, and finally column 2 and row 2. All right, so that gives me 9 buttons, and what I wanted was I wanted another row up above this. And in that row, what I'm going to put in is I'm going to put a label up there, and that's where I'm going to eventually put in the actual output of what it is that I'm sticking in here. So I'm going to ask this label to span 3 columns, and so you can see over here there's a column span, and to be clear, you have to click on the thing that you want to change. So I'm changing it to column span to 3, with the hope that that will cause it to spread across the 3 columns. And so now I have my basic layout. Obviously, I could shrink and grow all these various different places because this is a pretty terrible layout. You would click on any one of them, and then you could specify that you want it to be aligned on the other side, or you want it to be bigger or smaller, or whatever it is. All of that layout stuff you can absolutely do by clicking around. And again, I fully acknowledge it's a little quirky at times. You're just going to find that it's sometimes hard to click on something. If push comes to shove, hit build and run, and then go back to the editor, and you might have better luck again. And if absolute push comes to shove, just close it and reopen it, which I know is not great advice, but it's what I got. Okay, so now that I've put these buttons here, what can I do with them? Well, what I wanted to do was I wanted each of these buttons to actually have, a 1, 2, 3, like in a calculator, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I'm going to go up under properties, and you can see that there's a text field here. I've clicked on the first button, and I'm going to change it from button to 1, and you can see that changes to a 1. All right, I'm going to click on this guy, and I'm going to change him to 2. And then I'm going to click on this guy and change him to 3. And I'm going to walk my way through all of these until I get all of that labeled. And this guy, 6, oops, button 06 or something. There we go. And the bottom line is going to be this one, which is going to be 7, 8. I know this is riveting stuff here. Bear with me for just a second. And 9. Okay. I called that one 8. Of course I did. All right. All right. And my label, which is all the way up here at the top, I'm going to start off by setting its text to blank. Okay, so if I compile and run this, it's going to be the ugliest looking calculator in the world. However, it does give me all of the buttons. And again, layouts and all that you can move around. I'll let you figure that part out and wrestle with it yourself. But what I want to happen now is when I click these buttons, I want the corresponding number to start getting added to the label that is up at the top here. All right, so how do we make that work? Right now, all we've done is defined the view. None of these buttons are functional. None of them are doing anything. So it's up to me now to decide what it is that I want them to actually do. All right, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start working on the controllers. So in order for the controllers to work, I need each of these buttons to be a thing. I need them to have a handler that determines what happens when I press this button. So there's going to be a handler that happens when the number 1 is pressed. There's going to be a separate handler that happens when the number 2 is pressed, and so on and so forth. So each of these buttons needs to have a, in their code section over here, there is a field, and I need to be clicked on a button here in order for this to happen, called onAction. So I'm specifically talking about the action that's going to happen when this button is pressed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just magically type in here, pressed 1, right? Is the name of a method that doesn't exist right now. I just put it in, bear with me. I'm going to click my way through the buttons, and I'm going to do this for each of them. So that one is going to be press 2, and this one is going to be pressed 3, and so on and so forth. So I think you can see what's happening here. Pressed 5, and pressed 6. Okay, almost there. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, but none of these things exist. So why are you just able to type in a method name? Well, I'm really not. All of this doesn't work right now. I've just said that there will be these methods that are going to be called, but over in my controller, none of these methods exist. So why did I do all of that? Well, if I come down into the text version of this, into the XML, you can see that all of these are highlighted in red because they don't exist. And as usual, if I click on any one of the things that are red, it tells me, oh, by the way, if you hit Alt-Shift-Enter, or it will go ahead and create a method called pressed1 for you in controller. So again, I just clicked on the red text, I waited for the little pop-up box, and then I'm going to say create that method for me. And you can see over here in the controller, it makes a method called pressed1, which takes in an action event automatically. You don't have to do anything with that, and it's a void. Right now it does nothing, but it does at least have a method. So I'm going to do that for each of these. So again, click on it, mouse over it, and then you should have it create, and I'm going to do that 9 times. So you can see the general layout of what's happening here. All right, the other thing is I want that label that's in here to also be able to be coded. So I'm going to click on the label down at the bottom, and under code in label, I'm going to give it an FX ID. So I'll call it my label. All right, and now I'm going to click back over in the XML text area, and you can see that my label is here. And again, it says unresolved reference when I right click or when I just mouse over it. And so I'm going to say create that field for me. And over here, it creates a public label, my label. You could, of course, type all of these things in manually, but it's just easier to click your way through the interface. So basically work your way through all of these different things, make all the methods that you need, and then we're going to actually go ahead and code them. All right, so basically what's happened here is I have a bunch of buttons. Each of those buttons has a method that it will fire when that's pressed. And what I want to happen is that I want the text in the label to be changed each time. So let's deal with 1 for now. So I'm going to get the value of the current label, which is called my label, and I know it's called my label because that's what's up here, .getText. That's the current value of the label, which as we know right now is nothing, because I set it to nothing when I was working in the little GUI drag and drop area. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to add the number 1 to the right-hand side of that. So effectively what I want to do is I want to say 1 plus that, and I want that to be set as the label. So I can say my label dot set text to number 1 followed by whatever is currently in the label. All right, we're going to do the same code in each one of these methods. Obviously, I'm going to change the 1 to a different number for each one. Let's Control V. And I knew that was a bad idea. All right, enter. Okay. And all right, I'm just going to run through these. This was a 6. Just make sure you match the name of the method as to what you're actually adding in there in a pretty random order in here. Obviously, you could reorder them to make it a little bit cleaner, but I'm not going to care about that because, again, that's not what we're trying for here. And that gave me all of those. Okay, I'm now going to run this little guy, and let's see what we get. So when I hit 1, you see a 1 appears. When I hit another 1, another 1 appears. When I hit a 2, it gets put in at the end. Okay, so it looks like I put them on the wrong side in order for this to make actual sense. So let's reverse all of this. That 1 should have happened after what was currently in there, as opposed to on front of it, and the same is going to happen for all the others. I'm just going to pause and fix all of them, but you get the idea. Okay, so I just went ahead and corrected all of those so that you didn't have to watch me do a bunch of typing. All I did was I moved the number to the right-hand side in each method. And what we're going to do now is we're going to compile and run it again. And let's see if that fixes the problem. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you can see that the numbers are appearing where they're supposed to. All right, so actually 9 is not working because it looks like I didn't make a handler for 9. Is that true? It looks like that's true. Why did I not make one for 9? 1, 4, 7, 2, yeah, okay. And there it is, there is the 9, but I never actually set the on action for that one. So that's a good thing to go look at. So we're going to click on the button that is number 9, and sure enough, I never actually did this for that one. So that's a good debugging step. And again, you're going to have to add this guy as a method, and then over in the method, you're going to add in 9 to it. Okay, so is this the only thing that you can do in this interface? No, of course not. What you need to understand is that the scene builder is simply there to allow you to put in, draw out the interface in exactly the way that you want it without having to write a bunch of code. You can modify everything about everything that's in here. So you can modify the grid properties such that the layout is slightly different. You know, how much gap is there in between each of the numbers. I can make that a lot bigger. Good Lord. All right, and so you can see now the gap is bigger on the horizontal side. I'll make it really big on the vertical side so that they're really spread out. Or I could, of course, set that to 0 if that's what I want, and I want them right on top of each other. You can drag and drop the size of the fields, like here. You can move all these over, which is obviously what was wrong with it in the first place, and so on and so forth. So, like, this is just an easy way to get the interface looking the way that you want it to look. And then you use the controller box in order to actually write the code of what you want. You're not limited to buttons. I could also put a text field in here up at the top if you wanted it to look more like a traditional calculator. That's going to be a menu item, or not a menu item, a controller. And it was a text field. I can't find anything today. There it is. We're going to drag that down. And so I'll put this over in the other box. I'll put that in row column number 2, let's say. So that's over there, and then I'm going to give it an ID. So my text area, or text field, I guess. And so I could simultaneously now put stuff into the text field as well. So like up here in number 1, I'm going to say my text. Oops, I have to expose that variable. So I'm going to come back over to the text and my text field. I'm just going to mouse over it again and say create the field for me. And then in any of my event handlers, I can say my text field equals hi. My text field set text hi. And now anytime you press the number 1, in addition to it doing what it was previously doing, it will also put the word hi into the text field. And So I can press 2s and 3s and that all works fine, but when I hit 1, you see the high appears up here. I can query what's in the text field. It is just get text. So you've got get text and set text for pretty much each of these, and that should allow you to do things. You could read in that number, you could then add to it and do other things and make an actual functioning calculator if that's what you wanted to do. And obviously you could lay this out however you wanted. So hopefully that gives you a quick primer into how to use the scene builder in IntelliJ. Again, it is finicky. You're probably going to pull your hair out just a little bit as you're dealing with this, because sometimes you're going to want to click on something and it seems obvious that you should be able to click on that button, and you know that a minute ago you were able to click on that button, but for some reason it just doesn't want you to be able to click on it right now. So that's why you saw that I mostly moved around things by using the layout rather than trying to drag and drop. It is possible to drag and drop these buttons between, but I will be completely honest with you, it sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work, and I really don't know why. So I think it's more finicky on Windows than on Mac from what I understand. So it is just what it is. All right, well, hopefully that little intro has helped you guys understand how to use the scene builder in IntelliJ, and we will see you in the next video.